Kia ora and welcome to Aotearoa on this full moon, or 30 hours after the precipice of this full moon, which has been very powerful and opening the pathways into our eclipse season. And we're very lucky to have David Kahn join us today. And my feeling is we're going to go through the alignment process together and hand it over to David for this exploration into astrology and the evolution of astrology. So inviting everybody to come into alignment. If you need to sound, breathe, or move to support yourself to land into the space and harmonize into the field, please do so. Aligning physical, mental, and emotional bodies. With all-pervading soul or higher self and monadic galactic selves. Activating the Earth Star 1 foot or half a meter beneath the feet and connecting through the divergent meridians of the planetary body. The Rios de Luz, the rivers of light, the Fuego, fire, agua, water, and Oro, gold or mineral kingdom. And inviting those primordial elemental energies of creation up through our physical and energetic pillars so that they may cleanse, clear, and purify, regenerate, rejuvenate, and recalibrate. All the way up to the soul star, 1 foot, half a meter above the head, activating the soul star and inviting in the celestial elements to mix and mingle with the terrestrial elements, our celestial selves, that part of ourselves that resides outside of time. Surrendering through the core of Source in the heart of Gaia, where the new Earth architecture emerges, the new true Earth architecture. And surrendering unto that, knowing that we are held here, we are supported here. And so too is everyone we engage with when we are anchored in the new Earth architecture. Surrendering through the core of Source in our own heart spaces. Inhaling, exhaling with sound as we harmonize into the heart, into the unified field. Surrendering through the core of Source in the heart of the sun. And in the heart of the great central sun. Through the core of Source in the heart of the moon. And in the heart of Gaia, our ancient moon that is embedded in the African continent, partially. Activating the solar and lunar discs if they are active within your system. And surrendering through the core of Source in the galactic center. Wherever this resides in your system, it may be through the pineal gland, the gateway to God, all-seeing and all-knowing. Or it may be through the umbilical cord, if it's anchored through the physical. And as we invite our ancient future selves into the now, into this circle, inhaling, exhaling with sound as we strengthen and fortify our own unique pillars. Inhaling, exhaling with sound as we strengthen and fortify our pillar on the place in the planet where we stand today, honoring the guardians and the seen and unseen realms in this place on the planet. And inhaling, exhaling with sound as we harmonize around and through the planetary body into one unified field. And also into our journey today, we're inviting into the consciousness of the next wave of incoming galactics who are anchoring in the new star systems for our planetary body, who wish to be present here. To bring their wisdom into the circle and into the service. Some of which have already arrived. And as we arrive fully into this present moment, it is a gift to invite David Kahn into our circle today. David's been weaving around the planet as well, on and off planet, and has recently come into my orbit. And I feel very resonant with a lot of David's offerings in the way that astrology is evolving. So welcome into the circle, David. We would love to have an introduction. If you can introduce yourself and then perhaps take us into an understanding of Western astrology, Sidreal astrology, and Jyotish Vedic astrology.
Thank you very much for that beautiful space created for this. I really appreciate the invitation as well. And to all of you who I'm meeting for the first time, it's an honor. I have a bit of an interesting background because on one hand, I'm a very Canadian looking guy with a plaid shirt, a beard, and a hat on. And on the other hand, I have this data stream of information coming through me that seems very timely for the times we're in. And I try to break it down for people because I want to always be coming from a place of inspiration and hope and discernment at the same time. And one of the things that I've seen over the last few years is I've been into astrology for about 20 years, worked as a professional astrologer since 2017, 2018. And I stopped in 2021, late 2021, for about a year and a half because it wasn't sitting with me. I was giving readings and I'm like, I feel like I'm describing an older version of this person. Something was happening. And so I took a break from astrology and I did other things. And then I had a meeting in Singapore with an old friend, and this old friend I'd given a reading to. And after I gave him a reading, he synchronistically found three other individuals. One individual who had learned about true sky astrology, or actually developed modern true sky astrology. He met this guy. He met another guy who had taken the true sky astrology and applied it to the system of human design. I can't remember the third person he mentioned, but anyway, through this process, he said, Dave, what I've discovered, and he's this guy in Singapore, he leads a lot of groups, a lot of people through a seminar he's created called The Journey of Humanity. So he's very aware, he's very much a futurist. And he said to me, Dave, the system that most people are using, it'll get you kind of there. It will sound like you, but it's not what's really happening. And, at first I kind of was taken aback. I'm like, well, I'm also not attached to it because I haven't been doing readings in a year and a half. I did feel something, so I'm open to this information. And he says, look at this. And he just showed me a true sky reading of my chart. And I'm like, who's this person? This is me. There's something eerie about it. And as I started to look at it as an astrologer through my astrological lens, pieces fell into place. And the part I didn't tell you was at that time I was at a very difficult point in my life. And I was experiencing one of those dark nights of the soul, and I didn't know why. And it became clear after this that I wasn't meant to turn my back on my craft, and that instead I was meant to embrace it in a new way. And so there was a lot of energy released during that meeting that I went forward with, and the downloads started, and they haven't really stopped since. This has been close to 2 years now. And during this time, I've developed a complete system that links astrology with the true sky, what we see in the sky, and our genetics. So it's basically like a diagnostic tool for your own potential. And when I started to work with that and see this playing out, I also realized too that, part of the fallen agenda these days is to downgrade our DNA and to deactivate it. And, that's what a lot of people are getting caught up in the drama. But of course, the people like you guys who are gathered on this call and the work that Leanne does is meant for us to embrace our divine nature, our identities outside of, the terrestrial and into the galactic and the solar realms. And when that starts to happen, that naturally turns on our DNA. Now, when we align with the natural astrology, which is when you look at the stars in the sky and you see them, it's a very different experience. I happen to live in an area where there's a large park beside me. And so at night, there's no one around. There's very few houses. So if it's a clear night and I look at the sky, I can see the stars in a dark sky environment. And I'll go out my deck and I'll sit there and I'll watch the stars and I'll sit there and be activated by them. And most cities have cloud covers, but the stars are still there. They're still there speaking to us. And if you pull up one of these apps on the phone, the astrology apps that shows you the constellation, you'll see it's different than what the tropical astrology says. And when you notice that it's different, you might say, I'm going to put aside what I've learned about astrology, and I'm just going to have an experience right now of these planets and the constellation behind them beaming down on me directly at this time. And yes, I know light takes a long time to get to us from far distant sources, but in that moment, if we're thinking quantumly, there is a communication that's happening. And when we begin to interface directly with the stars, it forms a different relationship. And I have found personally that relationship is much more close to what is I call a true sky astrological chart. So that's my introduction to what I do. And through this process of exploring and working with True Sky, I've been getting a lot of other information about other spiritual systems that have all been kind of slightly distorted in our world, slightly changed. And that when we restore them back to their natural balance, they do what we think they should do. And they don't veer us off in another direction. So that's been another large discovery that I made, is sort of cleaning up some of the distortions and restoring our spiritual traditions back to natural law. And yes, go ahead, Liam.
Thanks, David. And yeah, that's what we're working with in our own embodiment and evolution, is to sync ourselves once again with the source of creation, with what is happening now, and with our infinite potential. So I'm
Absolutely.
excited for this interdisciplinary system that you've been formulating.
Yeah. So to give you a brief introduction to this, the whole difference that I'm talking about is in the zodiac that's used. And if you look at astrology, has been used around the world for millennia. In India, in China, the Mayan civilizations in the West, in Africa, like all over. They've looked at the stars and they've realized there's a correlation. Now, especially in the Eurasian continent, there's a lot of similarities, and in North Africa as well, between the astrological system. Now, the interesting thing is the system that we used in the West was developed in Babylon. And it's the only one that deviates from looking at the stars in the sky as they are. And the one that was developed in Babylon that became tropical astrology basically said, we're going to look at where the sun rises on the spring equinox. And despite the stars behind that, we're going to make our zodiac based on that point. So that's the start of the zodiac. Now, there's a thing called the precession of the equinoxes that happens. It's the 26,000 year cycle that's linked in with our pole shifts, that's linked in with other developments. And what this thing does, I wholeheartedly believe that this is artificial and that it's actually created by the moon, which is also a satellite. So the moon sort of creates this wobble of the earth, and the wobble of the earth it takes the one source consciousness and divides it. So we get a little bit of light at each different epoch. And what then happens is that light can be used by people who know how this works to create a different control mechanism. And I'll give you an example. During the age of Aries, it was might is right. It was war. That was the primary thing. This is the end of Egypt, the spiritual Egypt, and the beginning of the Ramses dynasty that lasted up until about the time of Buddha and Jesus. And during that time, there was massive wars being fought around the world, and might is right was the prevailing sort of control consciousness. And then from the time of Jesus to, we're still in it now. We're at the tail end of the age of Pisces. It's been about religion, and it's been about religious thinking, and it's been about having to have intermediaries between us and the divine. Now, none of this is true. This is just the background frequency at play that then can be manipulated and used to basically keep people in a trap. And the next one, of course, that's coming in is Aquarius, which has to do with technology. And Aquarius would be, merging our biology with technology and giving away the immense amount of technology organically that we possess. And so that's sort of how the precession of the equinox gets used. But when you tie an astrological system to that and you don't filter that out, so you include it in there, your whole astrological datum is going to be based around this artificial mechanism. And what True Sky does, or sidereal systems, which is what most astrological systems were prior to this one that happened to gain in popularity. It's similar to in the medical system. There's allopathic medicine, and 150 years ago in the US, it was allopathic medicine, homeopathy, energy medicine, all sorts of these different medicines. And allopathic medicine was the poorest performing out of the bunch. People were mostly using natural medicine until somebody with interest came along and said, well, let's give this one a boost. Let's replace what's being taught in the colleges, and let's, make this the dominant medicine because we can profit off of it. Similarly, this astrology gained popularity because somebody said, hey, you know what? This thing can keep things as they are. We can tell people a little bit about themselves. We can give them their personality and some traits, but they're not going to find the depth of who they are. And they're not going to be able to break their identity outside of the role that they play in our society. And so by tying it to the precession of the equinoxes, you never get to break free of that mechanism. And when you start to use what I call sidereal systems or true sky systems, and you actually filter out that 26,000 year cycle, which is significant, you start to look at the stars where they are. So astrology starts to agree with astronomy. This is the biggest link between the two systems. And when that happens, we start to then directly commune with the galaxy and the cosmos again. And we start to follow time cycles and rhythms that are rooted in what's happening in the cosmic nature of things. And in doing so, we can then take a look at another version of ourselves that hasn't been, I should say, influenced by terrestrial activities and what's gone on this planet. Instead, we're now looking at an identity which is much more galactic in nature, which is less distorted, which is a clearer signal from our essential nature.
Thanks, David. It's a really important point, no matter what we're looking at, be it astrology or independently human design. Whatever we're getting read is, I'm kind of look at it, the song the planets were singing when we came into being, into our incarnate form. And although that might be our default program, it is not at all what we're here to be. It is literally understanding your default program, then you can open it to the infinite potential of that which we are. And this is what's really important.
The way that I see it is, has anybody ever gotten into a relationship that felt like true love at first and then turned out very poorly later on? Like you found out that this person's intentions were not good. This is pretty typical where we find somebody, they love bomb us, and we're like, oh my goodness, this is the person of my dreams. And then as time goes on, it starts to be, there's control aspects, the shadows show up, and we realize this isn't what we want. But a lot of the time people get caught in these relationships, and this is a lot like what plays out in spiritual circles too, especially if people have ever been involved with, love bombed by a cult. And I know many people that have. Then they join a cult, and then they find out later, it's okay in the beginning, and then it does not serve them over time. Now, to a smaller degree, this plays out with spiritual systems as well, where you get a hit of something. So a lot of the time, not just with astrology, I've noticed this with other systems like the Kabbalah, for instance. The Kabbalah has two missing Sephiroths in it. And those two missing Sephiroths create a very, very important distortion that when used and when activations are run through it, yes, you'll get an initial hit, but it will only take you so far. And the thing that I've realized is that there are many forces on this planet, which I think we can all see, that are not here for everybody's highest good. They've kind of gone into fallen or predatory sort of arrangements and dynamics. And what they do is they latch on to organic systems and then they invert them. And this is what's happened with so many spiritual systems over the years. I know this because my uncle is a 33rd degree Freemason. And so I've gotten the history of Freemasonry. And this is one of those things people say, Freemasonry is evil. No, it's not. It's inverted now, absolutely. But in the beginning, he told me straight up when I was 13 years old that they had the teachings from Atlantis. He's not a very woo-woo guy. He's a very, but he's high up, and he said, this is where the teachings of this come from, is we saw the pillars that remained after the flood, and we gathered and we took them around the earth, and we built, monolithic cathedrals and monuments. And of course, when you have that kind of knowledge and power and a hierarchy in place, you become a prime target for inversion. So that's a prime example of how we went from cathedrals and these beautiful developments and monolithic structures into sort of this system that's now quite inverted and gets used for various control systems. So it's another example of that. And I believe astrology at the same time is quite close to that, in that it's not as dangerous or overt, but people end up using tropical astrology, and they use it in such a way where they kind of get a benefit in the beginning because they get to know a little bit more of themselves. And then after time, after 10 or 20 years, they find that they plateau and they stay doing the same thing. So it's not as dangerous as running energy from an inverted system, for instance, but it definitely has a plateau. And a lot of people will, a lot of people criticize the work that I do because they built businesses around this, and their livelihood is dependent on upholding something that is they might suspect isn't true, or any sort of having to investigate and see if this is not true brings up fear with a lot of people, especially if they've invested themselves. Now, I was invested in tropical astrology for a long time too, so I can completely sympathize with that. This is not something I was born with. I was a tropical astrologer for 17 years. And then I awoke one day and I had to eat humble pie and said, maybe this isn't the right way. Maybe that, it's not that I've done a disservice to everybody, because oftentimes, you get in there and you're intuitive with people and you're providing them real help to situations. And it's not that the system is useless. By all means, it's a great way to predict things in the matrix. I mean, the transits that you see in tropical astrology, they do play out on a very 3D level for what's happening. Now, if you want to go deeper and you want to understand the real dynamics of what's playing out, you should look at the True Sky or Sidreal. And we're going to talk about that. Leanne wanted me to speak into what's coming for the next 6 months. And I think the content that she was saying she resonated with was the energy that was moving through me at the beginning of this year, and still is, about, how big 2025 is and how profound the next 6 to 8 months are in setting us up for what's going to follow over the coming years. So if you'd like me, I can speak into that as well, Leanne.
Yeah, please do, because what we're looking for, it's almost like, when we come into sovereignty, the power is no longer outside of self. So when we know what's happening in the cosmos, how do we work with it? How do we engage consciously with what's happening in the cosmos to create a new trajectory for ourselves, personally and planetary, for all of humanity? And that's really exciting for this full moon, the upcoming eclipses, and yes, this 6-month passage leading into Pluto and Aquarius.
Right. Yes. I just want to say Pluto has transited into tropical Aquarius as of, November 19th of last year. And that does play a role. A lot of people said they felt the energy that day, even though it's not based on what's happening in the sky. There's still a large thought form that's associated with this that a lot of people have bought into. So as a result, there is something happening. And in this other system, this tropical system, it has happened. So we are feeling that influence. But is it the be all end all of what's really going on? No, because Pluto is still going to be in Capricorn. And if you look at what's playing out in the world, if you look at the amount of unrest and toppling of governments and, the people rising up against the establishment happening globally, that is much more indicative of Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto in Aquarius is going to be a completely different thing altogether when that happens in, the early 2040s. That's when, I would say that our complete systems are going to be redone in a very technologically enhanced way. Now, if we want that technology to be free, open source technology for the people, we can have that. Or if we don't pay attention and we get caught up in division and infighting and we do not remember our divine nature, it could be, control technology that gets used to build, a perfect panopticon, essentially. And so that's one thing that we have to be aware of. But now is the time of Pluto in Capricorn of actually changing the system so that we set ourselves up right to have a healthy technology, have a healthy relationship with technology. One of the things I was privy to when I was younger is I went to an institute. I was studying something else there, but they had at the same time a gathering of the top government officials, scientists, and psychics. So these were psychics that had worked for what do you call them? For like intelligence agencies. And they were meeting, and there's also thought leaders there too. So 4 groups are there, and they were meeting to discuss what the best outcome for the year 2050 was. And they all kind of converged on this idea of smaller settlements of about 500 to 1,000 people spread across the landscape that were regenerative and self-sufficient. And that they would have, the cities would be more nodes or hubs, but they would be smaller. And that all these communities were basically linked, and they were all using, regenerative technologies and completely zero waste. But there was a very harmonious interfacing of technology and consciousness. And this was, coming from very high level individuals. So it was not a, just a sort of a pie in the sky dream. This is something that they're saying, yeah, we have the technology. We just need the coordination, and we need to get past the Stone Age thinking that sort of permeates our dialectics in government in order to get there. So that's what I see as a vision for how technology could be used harmoniously. There's things like using sound waves to regenerate coral reef, which, as we all know, around the world, the coral reef, these complete reef shelves, like in Australia and in Florida, they've been quite decimated by, our activities. And so we need to use technology to actually regenerate these things, or we could leave the earth to do it, of course, as well. But technology can support us if our intention is pure, and our intention is actually to live in symbiosis with the natural world. So that's where I see Pluto and Aquarius playing out. Now, on a shorter time scale, what I see as playing out this year and why it's big is it's a lot of water energy. First, the eclipse the full moon that just happened in the sign of Leo in tropical, but actually it's in Cancer. And so if you're moving through big emotions, and you've been working with Leanne, and you're getting yourself back into a much more sovereign orientation, you might have felt that there was a lot of emotions moving through, a lot of water energy, a lot of mystical insights coming through. Now, interestingly enough, this relates directly with the eclipse that will be happening next month, because the eclipse that's happening next month is also in a water sign. So there's a harmonic trine, meaning that there's a harmony or a link between the two. So this one's in Cancer, a water sign, a cardinal water sign, and the eclipse will be happening in Pisces. And Pisces This is both in tropical and sidereal, because the actual conjunction's happening at the end of Pisces in tropical, which is the beginning in sidereal. So no matter what system you use, this is an eclipse in Pisces. And so with the north node of the eclipse in Pisces, it's basically pointing us in the world, and anybody who's on that frequency, into one of the bandwidths of Pisces. Now, what does Pisces bring about? Now, when I look at this from the perspective of frequency. And so there's three general bandwidths that I look at it. There's the consensus reality, there's the individuated reality, and then there's the transcendent reality. So the consensus reality is what most people in the world will experience, that are not awake, that are not trying to do anything with waking up, that don't care, that keep their head in the sand, that abide by societal rules. Now, this group of people is becoming smaller day by day, because typically what these people do is they rely on prevailing institutions and prevailing ideas to get by. Now, when these things start collapsing, these people start asking questions. So, if their inflation goes up, if their quality of life goes down, if they're getting ill, they're not going to be buying into the program as much. So there's going to be more people graduating into the individuated stage. And the individuated stage is where people say, I take responsibility for my life, for my happiness, for my well-being. This is really where sovereignty arises. And people say, I take self-responsibility now. I'm going to start to look at all the things in my life, and I'm going to notice that, hey, this pan is sprayed with Teflon and I don't want to be cooking with it, or there's lead in my paint in my house, so I'm going to swap that out. Or I'm going to start looking at the labels more closely and actually pay attention to what I'm putting in my body, and not just listening to the people on the TV. And when this starts to happen and people start to do this, they start to get more personal power. And the astrological signs behave differently for an individuated person versus a consensus person. Similarly, there's a third bandwidth where people actually get all their needs met, their cups are full, and then they want to actually co-create with others. And they want to actually make their efforts mean something for a force beyond themselves. And that's where we enter into the transcendent state. And this is where more mystical insights start to pour in. And so Pisces works very well in the transcendent bandwidth. This is really where people commune directly with the divine. And this is where they can get the best quality of insights, the clearest. But Pisces is tricky. At the consensus stage, it's a lot of delusion, it's a lot of confusion, it's a lot of addiction that can come about. And so for the ordinary person that's not paying attention, Pisces is a very hard sign to integrate. And similarly, in the individuated one, Pisces can often bring up some of those areas where we are resisting the divine. So it can bring up some lessons for us. And this is a water sign as well. So, we might see a lot of increased flooding in the next month or two. That's completely possible around the world. It's going to bring a lot of water energy regardless. And so that's just something to be prepared for. But water energy too, it is very mystical if we allow it to be. There's the muddy waters and then there's the purified waters. And so what it's asking us is to purify our own waters. Right now, I'm actually on a juice cleanse. I've got a big bottle of spicy lemonade. So lemonade, cayenne pepper, maple syrup. And I've actually committed myself to 20% of the year fasting. That might seem like a lot, but I really felt it this year that this was an important thing for me to do. The other thing I did was I looked at what's called a solar return chart. So you have a birth chart. You also have a chart that shows your unfolding for every year of life. And so one of the things I've been doing this year, especially in 2025, is saying, if you want to get past the noise and the chaos, the thing to focus on is your solar return. And so I've been reminding people to know how to do their solar return chart or get a reading done so they know what to focus on. Because in this year, everybody has a very specific pattern of things that if they do this, and they stay focused on this, they're going to be able to circumvent a lot of the noise, a lot of the distractions, and a lot of the resistance, because now we're co-creating with, the planets in the sky. And of course, for this, I used True Sky and Sidreal methods of a solar return. So it's basically like, what did the stars say What map do they give me for the year to make sure that I make it through this year, which has big energy, as seamlessly as possible? And I think that that's beautiful, like, to be able to say, you know what, there's so much going on. It can feel overwhelming at times and confusing. It's like, oh, one day this is good for me, the next day this is not good for me, and I don't know who to listen to. My friends and even my spiritual friends all seem to be in a mess right now. What do I do? It's like, well, you know what? The stars kind of have that figured out. Your galactic family wants you to be in communion with them. We all have a team out there. Our oversoul team is constantly giving us information and hints and nudges. And so if we turn back to the stars, we're going to be operating with more of ourselves online. It's literally a way of purifying the junk DNA, the 98%, bringing that online. And of course, this can happen anytime to anywhere to anyone. But if we want to know the specific mechanics of what's playing out this year and how that pertains, this is a particular year where there's a little bit more energy going on than other years. Even I was at a restaurant recently. It was a nice restaurant by the harbor, beautiful setting, but not really a place of extremely high consciousness. And I go in and there's a diorama that they had built of the arc of planets that are lining up right now. And, you can see these planets right here. I'll show you. Oops. If I could have share permission, that would be lovely. I don't know if that's okay. I just want to show this one arc of planets that's happening. I Okay, so just want to bring your attention here to these green ones down here. So this is at the time of the eclipse. See, all of these are lining up in Pisces. And really, Saturn's going to be moving into Pisces shortly after that as well. And Chiron's in Pisces, and Mercury and Venus and Neptune and the Sun. And there's going to be so much Pisces energy happening in the next month. This is where the veil is the thinnest. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. This is uncanny. And, like I was saying, that even this restaurant was showing this diorama of this happening, because this is not just an astrological occurrence. This is an astronomical occurrence. This is something that mainstream astronomers are publishing. This is an amazing event. This is a once in not just a lifetime, but many, many, many lifetime type events. And so, really, this is the time for us to rise above the drama in our lives and really reconnect back with our own inner source connection and be around people who are on a similar frequency and are similarly aligned beyond the division, beyond infighting or outrage, and are saying, we're going to pay attention right now and we're going to hold the line. That's what we want to be doing right now, because it's a very short period of time that creates a huge investment in the years to come. Now, if we mess this one up, we're going to be playing cleanup for quite a few years. It's not saying it's over, but it's going to be making things unnecessarily more challenging collectively. Because I mean, let's face it right now. If you look at my part of the world, and I come from Canada, but south of the border, it's sort of like we look down at the U.S. and we're like, there's something going on. And I'm not taking any side in politics, but when you have this much disruption, it can go many different ways. There's a lot of truth being exposed, and at the same time, there's a lot of angry people and a lot of shady things that could be happening as well. How this all turns out, we don't know, because there's misinformation is abound. But what we can do is we can align ourselves, and we can use that to grab the tail of a comet and hook ourselves onto the highest timeline possible.
That's great. Thank you, David, for giving us a map of what is and opening to the potential of what is possible. Has anybody got any questions for David? Or any contributions to the field at this stage? Jenny.
Hi, thank you. That was great. I've had, about a year ago, I was just getting really confused between this sort of dissonance between the astrology, readings and kind of, tools that I was following, and the fact that I do biodynamic growing, and there you are looking at, what sign is the moon in the real sky, and I was just kind of holding the two as a question, and so really just wondering, are you or is anyone else sort of sharing updates on what's going on with through the sidereal system, in a way, because I know you can sort of go into all these sites and find it, but that's quite challenging. Is anyone sharing?
Yeah, there are a few people that are sharing. It is growing in popularity. And one of the people I follow, um, she's basically made a prediction by the end of Pluto and Capricorn, people will not be using tropical astrology anymore. That's quite a bold prediction. But at the rate at which this is growing, it's part of something called the True Sidereal Summit recently. It was hosted by a woman named Annalena Fuchs, and it showed how many people are actually interested in True Sidereal. Now, Annalena, I'll just type the name in the chat. She actually gives True Sidereal updates. So True Sky updates. You can find her on Instagram. That's where she's most active. And she does it in relation to the gene keys, a little bit in astrology, but she's mostly gene keys oriented. And the other woman that I follow, she's got rather a cosmic name. She works with the Guardians, and that's what's her name? Ashiana Dean's work, but she's great. Amaya, I think that's how we spell her name. Yeah. So you can find her on Facebook mostly, and she posts really great, not only True Sky, but also she's very on point with her transmissions as well. So those are two resources that I follow. For transits mostly, and I'll be honest here, my work is very personal with people when it comes to astrology. So I'm mostly focused on a person's blueprint, who they are as an individual, and what's unfolding for this year. So I don't personally focus on transits as much, but you're also giving me a bit of inspiration right now. Maybe I can put out a little bit on transits, because with what's coming up, this is a particularly interesting and potent transit that people might want to look at with a true sky lens versus a tropical lens. Because if most people are looking at it with a tropical lens, like I said, they're not going to be getting all the information. They're going to be getting information relative to the matrix influence. So it's going to be, this is why people still use it, because it's not wrong, and it describes what happens in the 3D world. But the people gathered here, we don't really want more information about the 3D world. We want more information about, the transcendent realms and the, not only just beyond, but also naturally oriented, natural law oriented, that's rooted in our ability to make sovereign decisions without the influence of potential control mechanisms.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Thanks, Jenny. Any other questions for David while you have this opportunity? Well, I am excited. And even though I've dabbled in all of them, tropical, Sidreal, Jyotish, Vedic astrology, there's deep in my soul, or maybe my galactic self, I'm excited about the potential that's opened up with this next wave of incoming galactics. Back in 2012, the information that we received then was, when these ones come in, they'll be anchoring in the new star systems for our planetary body. And what I've explored is that pretty much everyone here entered through the sun as a portal, as a soul, into our planetary body. And with this next wave that began arriving in 2022, they were anchoring in the new star systems for the planetary body that are enabling access of the galactics to come in without having to go through our sun, and maintaining their galactic architecture and their knowing of their galactic selves. And this is pretty exciting. And you have a daughter too, David, don't you? That was born also in 2022. And I'm wondering if she might be a member of Shekinah's monad, the same monad as my goddaughter, Miranda. Miranda was the first one to arrive in June 6th, 2022. And she came in with the 7 of the 12 in that monad. And the other 5 started arriving in February this year. And they're really unique because they're coming in with their full architecture, not like us who, we crash landed into our soul and then into Homo sapien, and then have had to reconnect to our Homo luminous and our Homo galacticus. These new ones are coming in with their galactic self. So how do you experience that, feel that, and experience it with your daughter?
Pure joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I being self-employed, I guess I have the ability to spend more time, and it's not that typical story of a absent father off working hard, and I wouldn't trade it for anything, because the time I spend with her, I mean, she's still at a very innocent stage. She just turned 3. So she was born right before 2022. So right on that cusp at the end of 2021. But it's just this bundle of joy and resiliency. She hasn't really, opened up into speaking about anything that's supremely beyond this world yet. And we're always waiting to see when that happens. But it's just that energy of delight and curiosity. It feels different than other children that I've been around. Like there's a particular sharpness and a particular too. She's very good around boundaries with objects, what's dangerous, what's safe. Like she almost like I never would, but I could leave her alone in an area and she'd be able to navigate it just fine. But I never would, just as a very kind of parental thing. I've always got a sort of a watchful eye if she's ever around. But I am noticing something that's markedly different. Just not yet overtly. I have seen these children that walk in and they start spouting cosmic wisdom out of their mouths. But I think that usually happens around 4 or 5, when sort of more of them have descended into their form.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to witness because it was very clear. My goddaughter, I had communication with her 3 months before she landed. And after she landed, 3 months later, she was working with me when I was flying from Indonesia to Egypt. She was working with me there with the planetary body. And it was very clear that she's not going to come into awareness of that until sometime after 3 years old. So it's going to be interesting to witness. And I'm also feeling that we're going to be able to, in the way astrology is evolving, is to know which is the main star systems which people are originating from. Like I know in my own connection, the first system that came very present in my system was the Syrian system. So then I went on a deep dive through the Syrian system to discover more of myself. And once I did that, then along came the Pleiadian system. And then came the Syrian Pleiadian Alliance and their role in this turning over of time. And then I was taken to meet Arcturians and Andromedanes to the stage where I could literally meet people and know what star system they were from through their physical features and the frequency of their soul signature. And this is what's exciting, because I have a feeling that there's going to be a part of astrology that opens up into our stellar origins, our galactic origins. And I know this is an important part of our evolutionary journey, because it's not just having to clear our past lives of this planetary system to come into a more truthful, coherent field, but we're also beginning to have to resolve distortions in off-planetary experiences with others to
Yes.
greater coherence and connection.
So I'll show you too what you're referencing here. One thing that's interesting you can see is that I added Sirius to this chart. So you can actually see Sirius on this chart. This is actually my natal chart in Sidreal. But so it would be my 8th house Gemini. So for me, the role that Sirius plays, it's linked with my Mercury, which my Mercury is in the 2nd house. So 2nd house Mercury has to do with communication, has to do with resources. So a lot of my resources are actually linked with building resources, actually linked with Syrian knowledge, and it's in the 8th house, which has to do with knowledge, has to do with hidden knowledge, has to do with growth. So for me, it's been a growth journey, a self-discovery journey with my own Syrian lineage. What you need to do in order for this to happen is you need to figure out, well, what stars are associated with these different star systems, and then you can start plotting them on your chart, and you can actually start exploring this for yourself and creating your own meaning through that exploration.
How perfect. Thank you. I didn't know you'd already done that. I love it. That's great. Anybody else have any questions for David before he has to leave us? Any questions or contributions to the field at this stage?
Can you hear me, Leanne?
Yes, Talia, go ahead.
Oh, I tried to speak before, but I don't think you heard me, and I was like, oh no. Hi, David. I just wanted to ask you, because there was a lot of information, like, yeah, the tropical and the sidereal, like I've had both, and I know when I had my sidereal, that made a lot of sense to me. It was quite different from my, and I was just curious if you could kind of succinctly sort of like the harmony that maybe is between them, like how, you know, because most of the time, for instance, if I'm on Facebook, it's like, oh, the moon's in Leo, which is, you know, and I knew that it was probably in Cancer. And so I'm just curious, yeah, how they're weaving, how they do weave together, and is the tropical kind of being weaved out gradually, as you kind of mentioned? Yeah.
So there's a lot of your chart that stays the same because the houses don't change. The aspects between planets, the actual relationships and the spacing of planets doesn't change. So those parts of the interpretation actually stay the same. The only thing that changes is the actual constellations behind them. The other thing too, it's strange, is that the offset, you can often get very similar information. There's like, if you do a sidereal interpretation versus a tropical, it's not 180 degrees different. It's like, you know, when you start to really kind of drill down into the chart and look at it closely, you realize there's a lot of overlap here. But it's sort of like, I find that the sidereal explains things more directly, and the tropical, you have to kind of use your intuition to filter out. So the other thing too that I find is people who use tropical astrology that are very intuitive, they end up being able to kind of filter out the distortions through their intuition. And so what I find though is that the sidereal chart is more direct. It's just like, you know, if you use intuition with something that's cleaner, you obviously go further, but at the same time, you don't necessarily need it, because you can use your intuition with the distortion thing to filter out the distortion. But it's sort of like, would be kind of like driving a car with a transmission issue versus driving a car without one. You know, you're able to kind of navigate more seamlessly. Whereas, you know, if you're a good driver, you could probably figure out that transmission issue and work around it. I used to have a car that didn't have a third gear. It was a manual car. So I'd have to rev up second gear, and then I have to switch into fourth gear. I could make it work, but it wasn't ideal. Did that answer your question, or were you looking for something a little bit different with that?
No, that's good. Oh. No, that was good. Thank you.
Thanks, Talia. If there's no further questions, maybe David, you can let us know how best to contact you. This information will be also installed in the YouTube link underneath. But if you can let us know how to contact you and any particular offerings that you have right now.
Great. So I think the best way to do this, and I'll put this in the description, is I've actually created what's called the Core Wounding Calculator. So it's a free reading that you get in True Sidreal to begin to explore your Chiron placement. And it does this genetically, so through the lens of human design. That would be my thing. So it's completely free for people to use. You get a reading plus a free 3-day journey that allows you to shift this collective wound, which I think is very important, because the collective wound is really how the external world inhibits you from being who you really are. And so for me, it's the key to getting started, because once you get that piece out of the way, then you can begin to explore the different archetypes of your chart and actually not just explore the archetypes, but actually turn on the genetic potential that goes with it. And so that would be my recommendation. The other thing too, then, if you're pretty sure you wanted a reading, let's say, for a solar return, you can also get that directly, and I'll put the link in the description. That's the main thing that I'm offering right now for people, is to really, it goes a long way in getting your 2025 sorted out. So these readings are 75 minutes. The investment is $225 US if you're interested in that, because then I can sit down with you and we can go through what your life looks like right now. We can, I do a lot in these sessions, especially if people are doing the work. It's really easy for me to start saying, okay, these are the places in the world that, are alive for you right now. This is what your year ahead looks like. This is your, years ahead. I find with people who are really already sort of attuning to their sort of sovereign identity, it's very easy to work with those people and really get a lot of mileage out of even just a single reading. So my aim too with this is to really provide short bursts of rocket fuel for people, because we're not in times where we are meant to, we don't have decades anymore. We've got to make things happen very quickly. Alignments happen fast, and you come into focus, you'll meet somebody, and that's somebody you're meant to work with. You don't need to get to know them in the way that you used to, because that's the way that we're operating now. As the frequency of the planet gets faster and faster, and we're getting more of our encoding coming online and turning us on, we just need to start working with it, essentially. I see Tiffany's raised her hand there.
Yeah, well, it wasn't to interrupt what you were saying. It was just for when you were finished.
Okay.
I didn't have a question, but as soon as you mentioned human design, that brought the question for me. I know you mentioned it right at the beginning, and I thought, okay, you haven't mentioned it again, so I'll just leave that. But then you brought it back in there with the offering. So I've been working with human design for 10, 11 years, and reading using the original human design. So with the human design that you just mentioned, are you working with the tropical or the sidereal?
No, true Sidreal. And I'll explain the difference. Human design, I think, is kind of smart in the way that he did it, because he said, this is the map of your conditioning. Now, it kind of starts off with a negative. It's like, this is your conditioning, but he's using tropical. So he's showing you the way that, we've been imprinted with this thing. And he's also recommended a 7-year deconditioning period. And the thing that I found is that the tropical human design often becomes a mental trap for a lot of people. They get very identified with their human design, but it can be used to decondition them. It can be used for that. However, I found with the true Sidreal, what you're looking at now, and I don't use the body graph in the same way, I've actually reconfigured it a little bit, but you're looking at the genetic potential in various themes of life. So your potential for attracting wealth, your potential for aligning with your soul mission, your potential for, purifying your emotional body. What, where the shadow aspect of that is versus what the transcendent quality of that is. So I use it a little bit differently, but what I like about the human design is that the 64 gates match with the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, which are based on the 64 codons of DNA. And so because it's a genetic activation, now it's not 12-strand genetics, although I do know people that are working with building human design for 12, to map out sort of their galactic genome sequence, which when that happens, I think it'll be super cool. But this is the closest. This is basically the genetic map of your light body, is the way that I put it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned about the 64 hexagrams and the codons, because also even in the context of the transits that you discussed earlier as well, just having that awareness as they're going through the hexagrams as well can bring a deeper awareness for people
Yeah.
if you are going to follow transits.
Follow Annalena's work. She's really up on that. I put her name in the comments. Me and her have a great working relationship as well. She's a real pure-hearted soul who's doing a lot for True Sky, human design and gene keys. So she talks about the transit just in terms of the gates as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I do have to go now though. So I will see everybody. Hopefully I'll see some people again, but it's been lovely. Thank you very much for inviting me here today for this wonderful gathering of people, Leanne.
Oh, thank you, David, for your time, energy, and expertise. And thank you for your service and sitting in the question with the bigger view and potential that's available to us. I don't have to fit into a box. So much appreciated, my dear. Journey
Thank
well,
you.
and till next we may meet. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, David. And just checking in, does anybody else have any questions or contributions to the field before we bring closure to our journey today? That's a lot of information to digest and a lot of very valuable information too. Exciting when we open to the infinite potential of our capacity right now. So on that note, taking a moment to thank our seen and unseen realms. Thank you for this next wave of incoming galactics that have journeyed with us today. Thank you to the wisdom of the ancients and the knowledge that David opened the door to of the Freemasons from Atlantis in this conversation today, where I'm sure many of you felt that doorway open and a lot of information come into our own libraries. May we have the wisdom to discern right use of power in that information in the journey forward as we prepare for our first eclipse sandwich in 2025 in the element of water. May we remember to honor our waters, our internal waters, our external waters, and those magical places on the planet where the sweet and salt waters meet. And thanking you all for your individual and collective and planetary service and for gathering with us here today. May we all return fully intact onto the earth plane as we sing the song of life for one more day. Thank you, everybody, and kia ora from Aotearoa.